Hey, everybody, welcome to the GMI Rocket Show. Today is episode number 60. I'm really excited for our guest today, Russ Leimer, who is the CEO and co founder of a company called CitizenPath. And CitizenPath effectively helps individuals who are looking to apply for some immigration benefits to go through, get some information online and then go through filling out the forms and printing them out and that whole process through an online platform. So, it is helping individuals find kind of I hate to use the word DIY, but it's, this kind of more streamlined solution for immigration benefits. It's a really hot topic. There are some companies doing this stuff, and I love the direction that companies like CitizenPath are taking the immigration technology space, as hopefully you all know. So I'm really excited to talk to Russ today about this, about what he's built and sort of how he came across this problem, I guess, this idea to build it, and sort of where the company is today and where it's going. I'm your host, Roman Zelchenko. I am a former immigration lawyer myself, and now the founder of Laborless, which is an immigration tech startup that automates H-1B visa compliance, and also the founder of GMI Rocket, which brings you this show and is a digital marketing agency for the immigration and global mobility industry. So without further ado, Russ, thank you so much for being here and for joining. And I'm really excited to dig into your story.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Roman. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, likewise. Before we jump in, just for folks who are watching or listening, please shout yourself out, say hello, tell us where you're watching from. And of course, as I'll bring your comments up. I really love to make these things interactive, of course, as much as possible, and ask questions along the way. Right, like we'll talk about some topics eventually that are really interesting right now, and within the legal tech space, the regulatory space, immigration tech. So, whatever comments or questions you have, bring them up, and we'll get to them, and have you as part of the conversation. So, and of course, like this video, a heart, depending on wherever you're watching, like it, love it, clap for it, etc. So Russ, I always love to dig into or dive into the guest's kind of backstory. We'll obviously get to how you launched CitizenPath and what the company does, now, what your kind of growth trajectory is, or where you're looking towards the future. But let's dive into first, who is Russ? You have this really interesting background. You're not coming from the immigration law space per se, right? You have a really varied kind of entrepreneurial background, which I think is really, really exciting. This is not your first business. And I think it's going to be cool to see kind of where some of the things you've worked on in the past, how they've connected to what you're working on today. So I know you said you're based in Fullerton, California now. Is that where you're originally from? Are you from sort of the West Coast?
I was born in Iowa, but quickly, my parents moved me at the age of 1. So I'm, essentially a Southern California kid and have been raised in the Southern California area, a few different towns.
That's awesome. My family, I moved to New York when I was 2.5 from the Ukraine. So we did move internationally, but I don't have any memories of anywhere else but New York City. That's cool. How is it? I don't know. What's it? I'm from New York, right? So what is it like growing up in Southern California? I imagine it's like TV where you go to the beach every day, everyone's sun kissed, everyone's surfing or like doing stuff outside. Is there any truth in that?
Well, that's mostly fantasy, but I do have to admit it's 93 degrees out today, so
Wow.
the weather is definitely a benefit, right? I
Yeah.
mean, not having to deal with all of the weather that the other, uh, you know, side of the country has to deal with every winter and spring. So it's it's certainly easier in that respect.
When
Yep.
you were a kid, were you like, did you go out? Like, is it like a sports thing? Is it, what kind of kid were you, I guess?
Oh, I was active. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, I played a couple different sports, soccer and football and basketball, but I was definitely into, you know, boy things like reptiles and riding BMX bikes and doing all that sort of stuff. So
I love to ask, were you kind of the, lemonade stand kid? Like were you selling basketball cards or lemonade or fixing people's toys for money?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
don't know if I ever did the lemonade stand, but I definitely had a pretty good car wash business.
Oh, really?
Shaking down the local neighbors for a car wash. And so that was probably my first taste of going out and earning money from other people, other than my parents.
Hmm.
So, that definitely taught me how to interact with people. And, each customer is a little bit different, has different expectations about, just how detailed your car is after a $5 car wash. Some people would be, pretty easygoing about it, but others um, really have some high expectations for a $5 car wash.
How old were you?
Oh man, I mean, probably anywhere between 10 and 12 when I got started with that.
Wow. So you had some difficult customers who came up to a 10-year-old and would basically say, "Hey kid, the car's still dirty. I want my money's worth."
Yep.
Wow.
Well, customers have their particular spot that they're looking at. Right under the fender where they don't like to see any dirt. So,
That's interesting. That's such
but
a great. Yeah.
you've got to pay attention to that and learn and incorporate it into your check system.
That's and like, I mean, amazing, right? Because if you're a kid and you have, somebody yelling about under the fender, probably, I mean, if you're intuiting this stuff, you'll probably look under the fender for when the next car comes around just to make sure it's clean. Now you're paying
Exactly.
attention to this.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a learning experience.
It's like you're iterating, a 10-year-old car wash business, you're iterating and learning and sort of
Hmm.
the business lessons you can pull from that are probably endless. So that's really cool. Okay, so 10 years old, you're obviously in school. You've got a car wash business, I suppose. I'm curious. Did you have any friends helping you? Like, did you convince people to support you in this, or was it you and a hose and a bucket and some soap?
Yeah, I know I had a friend, like a neighborhood kid that was help me, but yeah, I think just one friend. It wasn't an enterprise with franchises or
Right.
anything.
All right. It was a small business, small local business.
Yep.
So, okay, so you obviously went to high school, I suppose, in the area as well. So, and then you went off to college, right? And you went to college in California as well.
Yes and no. So I started at University of Arizona. That's where I started school. I just remember that kind of woke me up, I think, in terms of, okay, now I'm, responsible for myself. I got to kind of carve my own path and decide where I'm going from here. My parents got me this far. I was fortunate enough to, have that opportunity. And I remember the first week, kind of the freshman introduction, going into an auditorium, and whoever it was explained to us that he wanted us to write down our anticipated grade point average for the first semester. And so everybody wrote down their GPA that they thought they would get. And then he said, yeah, you're probably going to get an entire point lower than that.
Wow.
And I thought that was a really crappy, motivational speech. And that, I mean, that's sort of the kind of thing that motivates me, is when you say you can't do it. So I did very well that semester. I got straight A's. And there was just other factors, I think, there that helped me decide that it wasn't the right school for me, for my situation. And I was looking for, okay, once I graduate, what are the opportunities that the school provides in terms of jobs and other opportunities. And I really wasn't finding it, so I decided to transfer and transferred to UCLA, where it's all a trade-off.
Hmm.
I did get some of those things and lost others. So.
Did you move back home, or you weren't? I guess your family wasn't in LA, so you did. You
Yeah,
lived.
not really close enough to commute.
Hmm.
So I did live near campus or on campus.
Yeah. And you did you end up finishing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I graduated from UCLA with a degree in economics.
Nice.
So it wasn't a business degree, and it was still a good experience, but economics is a lot of math and theory, and it wasn't really what I wanted to sink my teeth into. So I did go get an MBA later. I can't remember if that would be, I guess, roughly 7 years later, which was, more of what I was looking for. But I think I did that more. Well, I know I did really as just an insurance policy. I thought, I don't really need it, but I'm going to go back and get a master's in business administration just to sort of ensure that I'll always have a job. And I graduated in spring of 2001. So September hit, and a lot of things changed.
Wow. You graduated from the MBA in 2001.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was working full time at a company called Avnet at that time, and also going to school.
So I want to jump into that for a second. Before we do, I just want to give a shout out to a fellow Roman here, Roman Yagudayev from NYC. What's going on, Roman? Thank you for tuning in. And if anyone else wants to share where they're watching from, and of course, give a shout out for yourself, maybe where you work, etc. Hit us up and in the comments. So I wanted to dive into that for a second. So you graduated with an economics degree, which I did as well, by the way. I studied financial economics. I also wanted to do business, and I probably would have succumbed to that like intro, college speech, because I definitely did at least a grade point worse than what I expected. New York City high school did not prepare me for college whatsoever. I eventually figured it out, but that first year was a mess. And I tried to get into our business school, but my grades were too low. And so I ended up, staying in like the liberal arts college and doing economics. But in hindsight, I really love that, because I think the focus on math and the focus on the sort of theory behind, macroeconomics was much more useful than learning about, LIFO and FIFO. Like that stuff is just, you memorize it or you don't.
Yeah.
Whereas I think economic theory was much more philosophical, and that so set up a different foundation. So in hindsight, I'm very happy about the econ degree, but I definitely feel you in terms of it's not exactly what I wanted, when I went to college. So you started off, I know, working in the electronic space, kind of in a product, I guess, sort of marketing, business development role. I want to touch on that a little bit, because I think the first job is always kind of, important. It's life-changing for us as young professionals. What do you remember about those days, working first at, what's the name? It's
well, the company that, if anybody would actually recognize it, as Avnet. It's a Fortune 500 electronics distributor.
Right.
So the company within that corporation that I worked for at the time was Hamilton Hallmark.
Hamilton Hallmark.
And I had gotten an internship my senior year at UCLA, and was fortunate enough to get a job offer from Hamilton Hallmark at that time when I graduated. So that was a really good experience. I mean, I'm thankful for sort of that big company experience to start with, because there's a lot of resources, a lot of people around that have the experience. You're able to go do things, go to a conference or just learn in different ways that you maybe wouldn't be able to in a smaller environment where the money's tighter. So I thought it was a really good learning opportunity. And I enjoyed my work there too. It was just, interesting. Selling a lot of electronic semiconductors and things. It's kind of a cool space to be in.
Mm-hmm. And I like the point about working in a sort of a larger company, especially for somebody who eventually goes off to start their own business. I know a few people who kind of, went, I don't know if I want to use the entrepreneurial route, but they kind of went from college to just working on their own. And I think that there are a lot of things you can learn working at a big company, organizational skills, or even organizing your folders on your computer. If you see how a larger corporate entity does it, it kind of gives you ideas of how to do it as well.
Hmm.
That seems like such a benign skill. But if you've ever, a lot of people who don't have that experience, they don't think about it, right? So they plop all the files in a disorganized way, and then it sort of compounds. And I don't know. I think things like that, those kind of little skills are really valuable to pick up at a first job, especially at a big company. And then to your point, resources maybe for training or for learning or things like that. Um, so right, so Hamilton Hallmark was then, I guess, acquired or was a subsidiary of what became Avnet. And I know you stayed there for probably, I think, over a decade or about a decade in the industry.
Yeah, just about 10 years.
Yeah. And then you were getting your marketing degree, or your MBA rather. Uh, were you expecting to sort of, after your MBA, to stay in the company? Were you thinking, I want to start my own business? Maybe you want to get into technology, because it sounds like when you graduated, it was just before the dot-com bubble burst. So I'm assuming that while you were in your MBA course, everyone was talking about,
Right.
the internet and all the companies coming out.
So, I mean, I definitely had aspirations, thoughts of entrepreneurship, while going to school. I don't feel like I had an idea at that time to really grasp onto and put some energy behind it. But was definitely thinking along those lines. Just, I wasn't quite ready yet.
Mm-hmm. So I want to ask you about your first entrepreneurial endeavor then. So if my understanding is correct, you sort of joined this kind of physical marketing company. I don't know how to say it, because now all I think about is digital marketing, but this is like print and flyers and ads and direct mail. And if you essentially this company existed, is that right? And you sort of bought into it and became an owner or a co-founder?
Well, there was an existing printing company, printing presses, things like that, that I did decide to, with my wife's blessing, take out a second mortgage and purchase. So it was a legacy printing business that did have some existing business, but it was 90% kind of mortgage real estate related business. So what I wanted to do, I felt like, being a printing business is sort of a commodity. Everybody's low bid, trying to get the best price and bid the lowest price on a print job.
Mhm.
So I thought it was important to be more than that and add some value to it, and decided to integrate a little bit more vertically. So the company did have some basic mailing capabilities. So I invested more in the direct mailing side of the business, as well as on the front end, the creative services, so that we could quickly bring in-house a job that required some creative services, setting up the artwork, the communication piece, printing it with the existing traditional presses, but also bringing in some digital presses that helped us turn things, get them out quicker, and then direct mail. So our target markets were things like healthcare, still the mortgage and real estate side of things, as well as hospitality, the hospitality business. So it was able to grow the business quite a bit in those other markets, which was fortunate, because the 2008 hit to the real estate market really hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you bought into the business in around 2000, like basically when you graduated from your MBA.
A little bit later,
Okay,
so about 2003.
got it. So that's cool. So you vertically integrated with existing clients. You also expanded the industries that you were serving. Um, and I guess, I mean, and this, I'm sort of just basing it off of your LinkedIn profile, but I guess were you doing some other consulting work on the side, that more on the strategic side, as like a
Um,
separate company?
just a little bit, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, that's cool, right? Because you're running your own business, especially one that has, physical assets. I mean, you think about how easy it is to start a digital. Like, you could be a freelancer today with just a laptop and an internet connection.
Yeah.
You had a business where, yes, there was that, but there was a lot of it that was based on being in a space and creating a physical product and sending that physical product to your customers. Which I think is really cool. It's kind of nice to see both sides. I feel like, I mean, I guess I've worked in a store when I was in high school and college, so I've dealt with clothing. But for the most part, since then, all my jobs have kind of been intellectual labor, right? I had to be in the office, but I didn't really have to be in the office. I could have done it from home. I kind of wish I hope sometime in my life I get the experience of working somewhere where I can like work on a thing. You know what I mean? Um, so, I guess you survived through the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. Or like how did that, I guess, impact the business?
Well, yeah, we were holding serve. We were okay, but I mean, I kind of reached a point where um, I recognized that having that type of business, which was basically a manufacturing business, you really had to double down if you wanted to remain there. There was a lot of consolidation in printing, so my competitors were being bought up. The bigger ones were getting stronger, and to really thrive, you needed to have newer, nicer equipment that was more efficient and could, print at a lower cost. And I didn't love it enough to really want to recommit, 20 years of my life and that financial investment into that industry. And it was getting tougher at that point. So yeah, I decided to sell the business, and was definitely rewarded more for my customers than for the equipment, because the equipment at that point nobody really cared about.
Yeah.
It's worth pennies on the dollar. It's really the customers that matter.
So that's cool, and I want to talk about that for a little bit if we can. I think the I know before we kind of went live, we had this conversation, and I was curious about sort of when people hear about, oh, you sold a business, everyone just assumes that you then go ahead and you go buy your dream house and the yacht and you're
Right.
good. It's not always the case. But before we talk about that, I'm curious, how do you, maybe you knew these people, but how do you find, buyers? And I genuinely don't know, right? I mean, I guess a hardware business or a software business versus a software business are different. I would call what you did sort of, I guess, hardware, because you had physical goods. How do you go about that? And I think this will also answer maybe the question of, how did you initially buy into the business? Like, did you just know somebody? So how does that go about? How does one have these transactions?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember how I found the business, but I know a business broker
Hmm.
was a part of it. So there's business brokers out there that tend to specialize in, certain markets. Maybe one's in dry cleaning, the others, doing certain types of manufacturing or printing. So I definitely engaged with the business broker to sell it, but I believe the company that bought us actually heard about us through one of my neighbors there at the same business park. So uh, that's how it was sold. But yeah, it went through a business broker.
Yeah, I guess maybe because I'm in the software world, I don't even think about business brokers, but that's a great point.
Essentially, yeah, just like a real estate agent, but for your business.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, cool. So you sold the business, and I guess you had to you sold it off, and I suppose you had to either pay back investors, or I mean, I guess pay back yourself as an investor. Since I guess, you, can you talk a little bit about maybe that experience of selling a business? I mean, it sounds like you didn't love it. It wasn't this, like, you probably enjoyed it, but you weren't, like you said, ready to dedicate 20 years of your life. Were you relieved? I mean, to sell it and maybe have a fresh start. Like, how do you feel on the other side of that?
Yeah, it was a little bittersweet, right? Because it was my business and I put a lot of energy into it. It was something that I was proud of, but at the same time, it was taxing. I think anybody that's, put a lot of work into their own business can relate. So it did feel good to a certain degree to unload it. And kind of going back to what you said before, I wasn't able to, take a 2-week trip to Turks and Caicos and vacation, but it was sort of a wash, and at least me got me into my next chapter
Mm-hmm.
of my life.
And I think, I appreciate you sharing that. And I think it's important to note, because there's such a bias based on what we read about, unless you yourself know a ton of business owners. I suspect that a large number of businesses that are sold are either sold at a loss, or, just sort of as a wash, right? Meaning, or maybe the person makes a little bit, right? Because you don't really hear about that. That's not sexy. Forbes isn't going to write about, kind of a small business that's sold for exactly the amount of money that it's worth, and not some like 40x multiple that everyone hears about,
Right.
when Google buys a company, right, for a few $1 billion. But I think it's important to know that, because realistic expectations are really important when you're going to start a business. You cannot assume that you're going to start a business, sell it in 3 years to Facebook, and retire, right? Most likely it's not going to happen.
Right.
And, number one. And then number two, the idea that things are probably going to take longer than you expect, in general, to ramp things up and to grow the business, et cetera. Like you said, I don't know what your expectations were, but you worked on this for 10 years, and you could have probably gone on for longer, but then it's like, do you want to, right? Do you want to?
Yeah. And I think some people go into business. Well, I know some people go into business with an explicit exit strategy. We're going to do this, and then we're going to be purchased for, X number of dollars. That would be hard for me. I think I've got to be all in and really want to do it, and envision myself at least doing it for a long time.
Yeah, I'm the same. I think you have to, because you devote so much of yourself, right, to the business. And
Right.
it's hard if you don't feel like it's yours, maybe not for the rest of your life, but the foreseeable future. It's hard to kind of live and breathe it, if you will. That being said, if someone has any tips on how to get in and just as successfully grow and exit the business without feeling like you have to live in it for the rest of your life, let me know, because I would like to learn that.
And that's not to say you don't sell it someday, but you just got to be all in while you're there.
Absolutely. Um, I want to take just a small break. I just want to pull up Roman's comment saying, "What's up, fellow comrade? Pleasure to be part of this." So thank you. For anyone else watching, again, shout yourself out. Leave a comment, ask a question, etc. Russ, I want to kind of jump into this, point of your life where you come across the idea for what will eventually become CitizenPath. How did that happen? How did it, how did you come to, come up with this idea, or how did you come to launch this business?
So, I worked for the buyer of my business for about a year. I did some consulting. I actually thought I wanted to just find something full time, working for somebody else for a little while, and just take a break. But I really didn't find that very easy. I think by that time I had, kind of an eclectic background of electronics marketing and printing, and people that were hiring didn't know exactly where to put me, and how I fit their role in their industry. So it was a little bit tough finding something. So finally, in 2013, I was talking to a lawyer friend, who was a friend who happened to be a lawyer, and kind of brainstorming some ideas. Because at that point, I think, I probably was starting to think about just going out and building something new. I just didn't know what it was yet. And he had sort of been involved with another business that gave businesses and individuals another option for filing patent and trademarks. So essentially, an electronic interface for the patent and trade office and a way for people to file. And there's a bunch of businesses out there now, including LegalZoom, I think, that do it. But he had gotten involved with a business like that. And so we started to think along those lines and came up with immigration as another government, very bureaucratic process, a lot of forms, something that had the potential to be simplified a little bit. And kind of worked that idea in 2013. And finally, well, let me back up. We identified that we really needed to get a little bit more help. So I brought in an immigration attorney that had more specialized knowledge of that area of law, and another partner, Nick, who could focus on the technology side of the business. And so once we had that, we worked on it through 2013, and then were able to finally launch in early 2014.
How did you, so did you, quote unquote, bootstrap this? Did you kind of get any outside funding?
Yeah, we decided just to bootstrap it ourselves, and essentially put in, enough to come up with that MVP, that just basic product, and prove that our idea could work, and developed it from there.
Yeah, and did you, I'm curious for your co-founders, I mean, were they sort of working on this part-time? Was it, I'm just curious about how you, because you guys weren't like 22 right out of college, right? I mean, I'm assuming you obviously already had a career. It sounds like you had a family, and I'm assuming that your co-founders maybe also had, responsibilities and of their own.
Right.
How do you kind of get people to join in on the idea and actually devote at least some time in the beginning, if not all their time?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Nick's the partner that contributed on the technology side of things, are really the ones that spent significant hours in terms of development of the website and the business model, and yeah, it's a great question. It's almost better for Nick. I had my motivations because I believed in it, and I knew I could do it at some point. Don't know how long it's going to take, but if I put enough energy into it, I'm the type of person that's very determined. I just won't stop until it's done. And I was lucky enough to have a partner, Nick, that believed enough in this project as well that he put in a lot of essentially unpaid hours at that point to build something that we could actually earn a living from.
Right. Yeah, that's, I asked that because I, had my own in the very beginning when I had my idea for Laborless. I obviously could not, I'm not a technology person. I came at it from the legal side, but I was actually, it took some time to find somebody who can similarly buy into the idea, who believed in it, who thought, and who was willing, to your point, to put some blood, sweat, and tears in it before the company started to generate revenue. So, I think a lot of times there are solo founders, but I do think it's really nice to have a partner. You have someone to bounce ideas off of. You have someone who you can actually just de-stress with, right? So I think it's just a great point there.
Yeah, I appreciate collaboration and being told that there's a better way to do things, or it just works better.
Okay, so you guys had the idea in 2013. You worked on it for a portion of that year or a year, and you finally launched in 2014. Now, in 2014, I had just graduated law school. I just started working as an immigration attorney in late 2013. Maybe it wasn't on my radar personally, but I just feel like there was not really much of a discussion around immigration technology. Not even close to the level of where it's at right now. So I'm wondering, I don't know, what was it like when you launched? Were you expecting a big splash, or how did that moment occur? When you finally went live and you had a product, what next?
Well, I think we were at a stage, and we still are. The truth of it is, where the consumer still really doesn't know or isn't educated on the product. In other words, a lot of people still don't know that a service like ours is out there. When we were developing it, we definitely thought, I mean, it was an organic idea for us. It took us a while until we discovered that there's a couple competitors and one in development at the time. And then more came along. But there's overwhelmingly, I think most customers aren't really familiar with it. They need to be taught about it, what it is. And so that takes some time. I mean, we're still in that phase of educating consumers that there's an option between, completely doing it on your own and an attorney that they may or may not be able to afford, they may or may not need. And so we kind of fill that giant chasm in between.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that of course is a huge chasm, and there are a lot of different ways to look at it. It's an access to justice question. It is an efficiency question. It is sort of bringing people into the immigration space who might or into immigration who might not even have thought about it previously, because to your point, they maybe couldn't afford it. What was I mean, I'm just curious thinking about how it is now, but how did people react? Sort of how did you get the word out there? Back then, I mean, there was always, of course, Facebook at the time. There's already Facebook and Google and YouTube, and you could run ads on all these platforms. How did you guys get the word out there?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, Google, pay-per-click. There's a lot of relevant search terms for somebody that's, looking to apply for citizenship or apply for a green card, etc. But social media as well. And then I think ultimately just taking care of our customers and getting a good reputation. And obviously in an immigrant community, there's going to be a lot of sharing on who they can trust and had a good experience with. So definitely taking care of our customers and, being transparent and honest and just being a good, partner in that process has been an important step for gaining their trust.
Can you share? I mean, so what does CitizenPath do? How does it work for anyone who's watching or listening who might not know?
It's kind of cliche at this point because all of my competitors and everybody, the easiest way to communicate what we do, right, is we're like TurboTax, but for immigration.
Right.
And people kind of have that aha moment. But to get more specific, and you kind of touched on, you were reluctant to call it a do-it-yourself service, and I find myself doing that same thing, but it really is a self-directed, do-it-yourself service that sort of educates the consumer while they're preparing it to help them make the right decision. So somebody that wants to apply for an immigration benefit, examples would be applying for a green card, renewing a green card, applying for citizenship, and many others, would come to our website and select the appropriate form. There's a government form for each of those requests. And they would start by answering a series of questions. A lot of them are going to be the same exact questions as the form, from simple ones like name and address to ones that start to get into things like employment history or immigration history. And it's a lot of those where there's sometimes nuances or they're just asked on the official government form in a way that's not always clear, can sometimes for certain people put them in a bad spot if they answer it and they shouldn't be, or if they provide inconsistent information. There's just places where it's just can be troublesome or problematic if they're not answering accurately. So during this questionnaire process, we have a lot of tool tips that give more context to why the question's being asked, maybe, or where to find that information. Sometimes diagrams that can be helpful. And then when somebody answers in a way that could be problematic, we identify those issues, give them immediate feedback if they're answering in a way that we know is going to be a problem. Sometimes it can be self-correcting, meaning, oh, they just need to go back and fix something else. Or sometimes it's, you should not be doing this on your own. You need to talk to an attorney. We can't help you. You're forced to stop there, and there's a link, to find an attorney. So in a way, people can sort of use it at this point just to kind of self-screen and determine if they, should be using an attorney instead of doing it themselves. So we let people get started on this questionnaire for free. They don't have to pay first. And like I said, that way they could almost screen themselves. It's not until you reach the end that you need to pay for the service in order to download that prepared government form that's just ready to print and sign, as well as some customized filing instructions. So the government instructions cover every possible scenario, sometimes with confusing language. We'll take that and sort of distill it so it's for their specific situation. If children aren't in the mix, then we don't have to address, what to do if you have children. But if you are married and you need to provide certain documentation, for example, we'll outline exactly what to provide. So not just proof of citizenship, but the exact types of documents you might want to include that satisfy that requirement. And so these are provided as PDFs, so people can print them at home. But if they need to, we could print and mail it as well. And that's the gist of it.
And of course, I think, one of the questions as an immigration lawyer, for example, I would have is obviously making sure that they're not filing it when they shouldn't be. But to your point, there are these sort of red flags or potential stopping points if you do find that the answer triggers, and a big uh-oh, where it turns out that they can't do this themselves. They should speak to somebody to make sure that they're okay. How do you build those in? I mean, I guess you work with an immigration lawyer or lawyers to kind of make sure that the logic in the system tracks any potential issues that come up.
Correct. So there's, as you know, immigration law, there's just so many different scenarios and possibilities. So it is difficult at times. But yeah, I mean, if there's a way that somebody could have a problem with a particular answer, we try to identify those issues so that we are sort of checking them as they go.
Yeah, and I think that's just really important because, again, there's a lot of talk about this type of business from the immigration law community, and I'm saying this as somebody who's an immigration attorney, and I think there's like this idea that there's no immigration lawyer buy-in for these services, but of course there is, and in fact they're often central to building these products out. So I just, I think it's good to talk through that so that people can understand exactly how the screening, if you will, side of it works. Okay, so they go in, they fill out the form, they are then, prompted effectively to pay if they want to be able to print out the form with instructions, and they sign and mail it in. If they have, I don't know if your company does this, but if they have questions, is there sort of ancillary or half-hour type of immigration lawyer support? If they say, you know what, I get it, but I'd like to just have an extra, conversation with someone before I totally feel comfortable sending that in. Is that possible?
So our model is focused more on just building the software as a service.
Mm-hmm.
So, we believe we can be, 99.9%, accurate in terms of making sure we get it right for people. If they want to consult with an attorney, they're certainly welcome to. And we have a referral page, but we don't do that for them. They would just have to reach out to their own attorney or find an attorney and have them review it.
Yeah, of course. And I think that brings up an interesting point, something that we chatted about previously that I want to touch on, is this sort of regulatory landscape now where maybe that would be possible. In some states, that scenario, I think today could be sort of possible. And then there's some people who think that in the future that will be possible where you would be able to both provide them with the software, as a service, and also be able to legally provide them with legal counsel, right? Which right now is, in many ways not possible, because you can't sort of charge them for it, and pay the lawyer and split the legal fees. I mean, and I know this is sort of a theoretical question, but would you imagine that if that was possible, would you want to build that into your business model? Do you think that's a good idea? Or do you think that it should be, look, we're a SaaS company, we provide the software, that's what we focus on. When you need legal advice, that should not be from within the organization?
We don't have a definite direction on that. In other words, we're still listening to our customers and see what they want. But yeah, at this point, our focus is just to be as good as we can be in terms of the software, and that's something that we could easily add on later if we think our customers really want it.
Yeah, and if the legal, right now California doesn't allow for it, but of course, I guess Arizona's talking about it. Utah, of course, is like the big sandbox. And I know we were just chatting about this before. Florida just went the opposite direction and struck down unanimously a vote to allow, quote unquote, non-lawyer ownership and fee splitting. So it is interesting to see kind of where these things are going. I have a feeling it's going to eventually end up resembling, kind of cannabis style laws, where some states allow it, other states don't. Federally, there's no rule. Obviously, this isn't, probably not a Supreme Court matter. It's, an American Bar Association, ethics committee type of matter, and individual states. But I feel like, given how prevalent just software is in our lives, in medical, in just broader legal, right, and just our day-to-day communication and everything we do, I feel like we have to move eventually in that direction, where there's going to be buy-in from legal, but there's also going to have to be some level of ownership from technology people who can help us like navigate the legal world, from a tech angle.
Well, to a degree, immigration law is pretty complicated. There's so many exceptions and rules and, different ways that you could go wrong, that it requires a good immigration attorney some research a lot of the time to find the answers. So if you've got software that has been already researched to address that scenario, it could actually be an aid to an attorney.
That's a good point. Yeah. They can use that to a new attorney can use that as like their kind of check, right? I mean, because how does it work in real life? You're a new attorney. If you're lucky, you're at a law firm and they have resources. You can go to your senior attorney or the partner. They'll give you a checklist, which is going to follow some kind of legal logic, and then you fill out the form and work on your case based on that checklist. This is kind of the same thing, except it's digital, right? And there's software behind it. So yeah, that's a great point. It's both a consumer product and an aid to lawyers.
I mean, when we design the software, there's cases where, I'll run this by my immigration attorney partner, and he'll say, "Well, that's really rare," but it's going to happen to us. We've got to be prepared to address just about every scenario, and if we can't, then we got to put up a stop sign and just say it doesn't address you or your situation.
Definitely. Which is smart, right? Because, and of course, from an ethical perspective, the person has to know that if you can't be sure of their situation, they should probably talk to somebody. So where do you think, I guess from your perspective, from as much as you can share, like, what is your vision for the company? Where would you like it to go? Kind of, if you can share stuff you're working on, I guess, just thinking like, what's the future for you guys? Because I think that is sort of reflective of the future for the industry as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of going back to what I said before, I think we're still on that upward curve of people just learning what this service is, what it can do for them, how it can add value to their situation. We're in the process of retooling what we do so that we are ready for growth. And what I mean by that is, we initially built our service on kind of a third party solution that allowed us to get that product out and do quite a bit with it. But we're at a point where we want to do more things that we can't do in the current environment. So we've been rebuilding the entire platform over the last few months. So, users will see it in terms of just, small features and things that make the user experience a little bit better. But it also positions us to grow in a couple new ways as the market develops.
That's awesome. And also owning the infrastructure is important, right? Because if you're building on someone else's platform in a way, something happens to them, God forbid, but if something happens to them, you can't do anything about it. So that's really cool. That's smart. Have you guys, I mean, it sort of sounds like it's a slow, steady kind of organic growth for you, and you're obviously continuously taking steps, looking forward. One of the things I do like to ask guests about is, I mean, what challenges have you had, right? Like what bumps in the road have you experienced? In part because I think that's where we can all learn, a lot, right, from other people's kind of mistakes, or maybe not mistakes, but just difficulties.
Yeah, I mean, none really come to mind that are like a great learning example, but the entire history, is full of tiny iterations. I mean, literally every day we're making little tweaks here and there. So I think what comes to mind for me is just a constant learning from our customers, listening to what they have to say. We let our customers give us feedback in terms of a survey, and if there's any way that we can improve on our process based on their feedback, we try to do that because it might help just a little bit for that next person. But I'm trying to think of a great example of something where we really ran into a block, but it's been kind of a slow, linear progression to where we are now.
Yeah, I mean, and that's great too. I'm curious from a business perspective, did you expect it to be faster? And I'm only saying this, I'll give you context. I'm saying this because when I launched Laborless, we had this, our strategy was to go after universities, because a lot of universities hire H-1B workers. And guess what? These universities typically publicly share their staff names and emails. So we found all the immigration people who worked at all these universities, and we were like, great, we've got everyone's email addresses. We're going to offer it to them for free because they're, it's a no-brainer. Of course they're going to say yes. 0 bites. And I was lucky if people responded. A lot of them just were courteous and said, we're not interested. I had a few people who were like, who the hell are you? Stop emailing me,
Well, that's where, my head is the answer is yes. I would have wanted us to grow quicker. But I think it's a slow march in earning trust. We've got a great track record with Trustpilot reviews. Nothing, we've not gotten bad press or anything, but it just takes a long time to just earn people's trust and be a brand that people can rely on and just, click without too much worry. Because it's a big deal, right? It's not just, you're not purchasing shoes, you're putting a lot of personal information online. And then, of course, trusting us to do the right thing with it, which, by the way, we don't share or sell any data. And then just the actual immigration process itself. Is it really prepared correctly? Is it going to create more problems for me? Which, if done incorrectly, it can.
Yeah, it's really important. It's really the trust is important.
Yeah, it's understandable.
We've got a really, really great question here from Jeff O'Brien, who's also a California-based lawyer and an immigration tech exec. So he says, do you think that if CIS is able to process all forms online, and they're able to effectively screen eligibility, that would be a threat to your business model? Or do you always think that you would be one step ahead? And I will say this, I mean, I think most people watching or listening probably know that virtually all immigration forms, period, whether it's an application for something or a different, any other type of form, basically have to be printed and sent to, USCIS in this case, via FedEx, right, or UPS or what have you. And that's a big challenge. We can build all the tech we want, the coolest, most brilliant, innovative, artificially intelligent technology, but you still have to send it to printer at the end of the day, which is crazy. But of course, there is a hope to digitize things from the government side. So what are your thoughts on that and how that impacts the business?
It's a good question. There are, I can't remember exactly, roughly 6 forms which consumers can file electronically on the USCIS website. But there is a problem with that because they can screen it, but they're not looking out for the actual filer. In other words, if that filer is going to answer a question in a way that puts them in a bad position, the USCIS isn't going to stop them. So right now, I think the e-file option is sort of, it's alluring to a lot of people. They view it as a quicker way to get their benefit, which sure, it saves you, a couple days in terms of mail and getting it submitted. But really, the quickest way to get a benefit granted is to just submit all of the necessary evidence and document in a well-prepared manner the request. So right now, I think it's sort of dangerous, the e-file system, for a lot of customers that might use it. And yeah, it's a threat, but I know, myself and competitors are looking to USCIS for the development of an API. So basically a way for us to submit the same data electronically. Sort of like the TurboTax analogy. Again, you can prepare the taxes on the TurboTax website, and then you can electronically file them. So at some point, USCIS will get there. It doesn't look like it's real soon, but we're not too worried that will take away too much business.
Yeah. It's interesting because, I'm living on this sort of Department of Labor side of things with Laborless, and they built a new system a few years back called FLAG, the Foreign Labor Application Gateway. And as far as I know, they have no interest in building APIs. Now, to be fair, it's a slightly different system. You're not applying for any benefits. You're sort of uploading documentation in support of kind of, different visa applications or immigration benefits. So it's not the application for the benefit itself. But they've been, as far as I know, and as far as I see, there's no sort of API capability there. So I hope you're right, and I think if USCIS right now has the opportunity to actually build something from scratch, that they do take into account the fact that there are third-party companies, like CitizenPath, who are building, to your point, not just a good user experience, but these like checks that will benefit the immigrant. And by the way, I'm sure the government doesn't want to get a whole bunch of crap applications with mistakes, right? Like, it's going to cause back and forth for them. It's going to increase backlogs. They just want to process good information written well and put together in the right way. So I would think that it's to their benefit to make sure that what garbage in, garbage out, they say. So then the opposite must be true. If it's good quality data and information coming in, hopefully it's, more streamlined process.
Well, that's a great point, because in terms of rejected applications, it runs right around 10%. So if you've got roughly 9.5 million immigration forms filed every year, call it 10% are just rejected before they get in the first door. So that's 1 million applications right there, or applications or petitions. So they're going through, some process to get to that point, issue the rejection. That costs a lot of money that they're not recouping. And then you get to the, point where it is accepted and it's not complete. So they issue an RFE. They don't collect more money to handle an RFE, which is really costly. Not to mention it slows things down tremendously. So, to your point, Roman, to have things entered into their system more efficiently and complete would save them millions and millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Kind of
And
huge.
and I remember the whole, if you remember the whole mess a couple of years back about USCIS claiming that they're going to go bankrupt, they were going to, fire 14,000 employees, or maybe that was DHS wide. I can't remember now. But then, miraculously they didn't. But the point is that the fear of looking at their bottom line, because they are they are a fee funded agency. To your point, that this would hopefully be helpful. So yeah, that's an interesting point, right? I think the initial instinct is, well, if they're going to automate it, is there still a business? But then there's a benefit, in terms of there's still a benefit to the end client, because there's the checks and the sort of, red flags and things. But even if the government doesn't care about that, let's just assume that they don't care. There is still a benefit to them to make sure that the data and the applications they get are of high quality, and they can rely on third-party companies via APIs to better ensure that the applications coming in are good.
And by the way, I mean, the same is true for law firms. So, law firm might use software packages like Serenade to manage their cases and prepare forms. And they can print the forms directly from the software, but they're not able to electronically file it through that software. So if an attorney, as I understand, wants to electronically file, you've basically got to take all the information from the printed form and just rekey it into the website at USCIS.
That's a good point.
Which is an opportunity for errors, right? So.
Yeah, that's a great point too. Yep. Yeah, and so I would think that because companies like CitizenPath, and then on the sort of, if you want to call it B2C, or the consumer immigration side, and the immigration lawyer case management companies who also would like to see an API, my hope is that USCIS listens, because that is a lot of different people from different angles, basically asking for the same thing. As a quick plug for the American Immigration Lawyers Association, there's gonna be an AILA Immigration Tech and Innovation Summit in December, that's virtual, and there's going to be a discussion with some USCIS folks, the CIO and CTO, I believe, and I'm confident this is going to come up surely as a question to them. So it'll be interesting to hear what they say. Probably they hear the concerns, and definitely they understand it. The question is, will they act on it, right? And if and how quickly, and what will it look like? But this is a really interesting topic, and I'm excited to follow it, right? And see what continues to happen. Cool. I wanted to, well, I just, as a quick note here, from earlier, Roman did mention this book, Built to Sell. So just to your earlier point, Russ, about, people who come in with the mindset of having an exit strategy for a company. I guess there's our blueprint, Built to Sell. So anyway, thank you for that question, Jeff. Really, really good topic of discussion. So, I guess we understand where you guys are at now, and sort of what you're looking for. I guess my last question to you sort of would be, what would you want? I mean, given that you guys have been around since 2013/2014 is when you launched, you're sort of trending upwards, continuing to trend upwards. What would you want people to know about CitizenPath, right? Like, given where things are going and what the company does, like, if you could sort of snap your fingers and educate people on this one thing, kind of, what would that be?
Great question. I mean, we love what we do. I think anybody that customers would come in contact with really enjoys this space in terms of immigration and helping people, and actually having genuine concern for our customers and making sure everything's perfect. So I would definitely want customers to know that we care. I mean, I'm having fun, and really like what I do.
That's important. That definitely is important. I'm wondering, and thank you for sharing that. I usually like to end these conversations on sort of like a fun note. I do have a question for you. Uh, do you know, like, what's your, do you know your family's immigration story? I mean, I don't know who, like, do you know who was born elsewhere, or and when they came over, if anyone?
Not well, but yeah, roughly. Yeah, I've got an uncle who researches that, and we know that we've got our that side of the family, of course, came from Austria around 1850.
Wow.
So a lot of them migrated to the Midwest, kind of the Missouri area. So I have actually been to an old farmhouse that has, grave markers from, the second half of that century with our last name on it, which is a little odd to see. Um, but I don't have a lot of details about it.
Yeah, yeah, that's cool. I mean, that's something. And I ask this because I think it's sometimes really obvious for someone who either is an immigrant, or maybe their spouse or somebody in their direct immediate family went through the process to like have the connection to it. But most of us, right, unless your entire family comes from a native or like a First Nation, you're going to be from somewhere, right? And I always find it interesting. Not everyone knows, to your point, not everyone looks into it, and many generations later you kind of just, you don't know. So it's cool that it's good to keep tethered, I think, to like that history.
Yeah, it'd be nice to know more.
Yeah. So I want to end this on a question from a viewer. So Anya Siberia from YouTube asks, as someone who helps people immigrate to the U.S., did you ever have any urge to live in any other country, or maybe you did live in any other country?
Mhm.
I think it's a great question.
So no, I haven't lived in another country. I always thought that after college that I would spend some significant time in Japan. I actually learned Japanese in college to the point where I was getting ready. It just, I think things developed with that first job in a way that I kind of wanted to stay and take advantage of that role. But I sort of, I don't regret it, but you kind of wonder what it would have been like if I would have had that experience, because that was my plan.
How's your Japanese now?
It's terrible. You don't use it, you don't
Yeah.
retain it.
Well, I suspect that if you went to Japan, you spent 3 months there, I'm sure some of it would come back.
Yeah, I still have to do that, don't I?
Yeah, and you still have plenty of time. You never know. I mean, if built to sell, if all things go well and you get your yacht at the next time around, maybe you can sail the yacht to Japan and spend a couple months there.
Not yet. Immigration's fun. So.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. Well, Russ, thank you so much. This was really, really interesting, and appreciate you sharing your story, your journey, and of course, talking a little bit more about CitizenPath. To your point, just educating consumers and prospective immigrants on on the fact that these options exist is still important. And because of the inherent kind of nature of immigration clients, right, immigrants coming from other parts of the world, you're kind of always continuously educating people because they're coming into this space potentially not from a place of knowledge around what's possible. So I think that's probably part of the fun of continuously figuring out creative ways. I mean, you're a marketing guy, to market them and to market to them and to connect with these communities and provide your services. So I wish you best of luck, and I'm excited to keep watching you guys grow, and of course in parallel excited to watch what happens with the industry. So thank you again for joining. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm thankful, Roman. Thanks for having me, and I appreciate being here. It was fun.
Awesome. Awesome. Cool. So thank you, everybody. That hour flew by. Thanks for watching. Thanks for your questions and your comments, Roman. Saying looking forward to connecting with you both. Definitely. So, and for folks, please reach out to Russ Leimer on LinkedIn. Check out their website. All the contact information should be in the show notes on YouTube, on Facebook, on LinkedIn. And but yeah, so connect and learn more, and learn more about Russ. And in the meantime, as always, thank you for being here and for watching and listening into the show, and for your comments and questions. And see you next week. In the meantime, stay safe and peace out.